All right, well, welcome everybody. Once again, we're very glad that each of you is here, and we hope that today's training will be meaningful for you in the roles that you have in the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs and over on Health Science Campus. So let's just go ahead and get started. Most of the folks on the call here know me, Rick, and Jamie, but for those of you who don't, I'm Stacy Wisniewski, and I'll be responsible for a lot of the training and support that will happen with InfoEd. And we'll introduce the other folks on the call in just a minute. And today's topic is InfoEd 101, proposal and budget orientation. This really is intended as an overview kind of training. So there likely will be things we don't get to, especially specialized scenarios, but more on that in just a minute. Just to put some names and faces, especially for those of our colleagues who work on health science and may not be familiar with this particular office. I'm Stacy, that's my photo. Jamie Vannatta is on the call. She is our resident InfoEd expert. She knows the ins and outs of the system and how it works and how to go hunting for solutions when things aren't quite working right. And then Rick is our director of research advancement, kind of spearheading the initiative and helping us collaborate across campus with various stakeholder populations. So before we get started on the content, just a quick reminder that live captioning is available in Teams. So if you want that or need that, you can turn that on with the 3 dots in the menu bar and the word more. There's an option there to turn that on. We do ask that if you have questions to post them in the chat, and we will try to address them. Probably more so at the end because today's training is really content heavy and we want to make sure we get through the full overview of things and then address questions at the end. I know that's not always ideal because you got the question in the moment, but we just want to make sure you have a chance to see as much of the site as possible, and we absolutely will address your questions either at the end or in a one-to-one follow-up of some kind afterwards. And we just request if you can keep your microphone muted like we have right now. That's helpful with limiting the echo through each other's machines. So today's agenda, more specifically, we are going to share with you a little bit about what InfoEd can do, how it can be a benefit to the folks who are going to be using it. And we're going to give you a demonstration of the proposal module and the budget tool, and then we'll address questions and point you to some resources at the end. So let's talk about the benefits of InfoEd. It is more collaborative. It allows people to go into the proposal record and make adjustments as needed, depending on what changes need to be made. The PI can go in, the grants coordinator can go in, an administrator in an office or a department can go in, and various people can do the work that they need to do together on the same record and make sure changes are made that need to be made. Also, routing is automatic. The system sends out notifications and tracks that progress, which I think is really slick and efficient. And email notifications keep the PI informed. Various types of notifications go out depending on what's happening with the proposal and where it is in the route. So you may get some slightly different communications from what the PI will get, but the system does ensure that the PI is kept abreast of what's happening with their proposal. And all proposals and other types of records are all in one place. So no more having to go find it on this machine and that shared drive and OneDrive over here. And oh no, there's an actual piece of paper somewhere. What happened to that? It's now all housed in one convenient place where the various people who need to get to it can find it easily and get back into it when needed. And InfoEd has been built and designed on our side to take the place of the proposal intake form. the RSP 100 form, the Excel budget worksheet, and the RSP cost match form. So all of that functionality that happened across those 4 tools has been folded into InfoEd in some way. It might look different, it might happen in a slightly different way, but the end result, the takeaway is there in some form or fashion throughout the module in the budget process. And eventually, when we have the product fully rolled out, including the post-award management pieces, there will be a reduction in processing time between the award notification coming in and account setup. That's phase 2. That's coming next fiscal year. So a little bit more of a delay before that's ready, but once it's all in place and implemented, that'll be a great benefit because, I mean, the real takeaway is having money and being able to spend it. So that should go a little more smoothly. At this point, I'm going to hand the reins over to Jamie so she can do a technical demonstration of the proposal module and the budget. Again, if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. We will track them and hopefully be able to address them at the end. All set, Jamie?
Yes, indeed.
All righty. I will stop sharing and turn things over to you.
Okay. So I just have to get myself resettled here and open up my. Oh, okay, there we go. Now I need to share and I will hit this screen. Okay. All right, so the first thing I wanted to show you guys is actually when you first go to the website or when you go to the URL, you're actually going to see our Tower login page. So you're going to see something that looks very familiar when you go to infoed.utoledo.edu. One of my esteemed colleagues will toss that into the chat. But that is our URL. And when you click on that or when you use your favorite browser to go there, you will receive like the Tower login page and it'll ask you to log in using your Rockets account. So you're going to use your regular UTAD username and password to get into InfoEd, just like you get into almost everything else. But for today, I'm actually logged in as someone named Demo PI because I wanted to show you guys not my view of things, but the researcher view of things. So I am in our test system as well. So some things are not exactly the same as our production environment, but a lot of things are the same at this point. So I just want to give you a brief overview. When you first log in, you're going to land on this page called the portal. And so there's some basic areas here that you need to be aware of. Number one, we have this kind of top blue bar. On the left, we have a little short menu over here that's called our left menu. And then in the middle, we've got some white boxes on a gray background. Those are called widgets. So I'm going to highlight a couple of little things that are going on here. Number one, in the top blue bar, there's links to a bunch of different things. The ones that are going to be super important for you guys are going to be locate my records. Well, for researchers, locate my records and locate records. So locate my records is give me everything on which I am the PI. So that's a very specific request, and all I would do is just click on it and then I'll see all the things on which I am the PI, including my conflict of interest disclosure, as well as my 4 proposals that I'm currently on as this demo, or I'm currently PI for in this account. But locate records gives you the opportunity to search for things. So in this case, I would be searching for records to which I have access. Maybe I'm not the PI, maybe I'm a co-investigator. If I'm a department chair or a department administrator, this would be where I would find records that I have access to. So I want to highlight those 2 functions because they are different, and people often think, oh, locate mine would be everything that is in my purview to do, and that's not how InfoEd thinks of things. So my is always things that you are the PI on. So you may never have anything in locate my records. You may always have to go into locate records depending on your roles and responsibilities in the system. On the left-hand side here, you'll notice that we have both proposals and SPIN. So SPIN is also an InfoEd product, and it is an opportunity finding database. And so if you have a SPIN account, you'll be able to link these 2 things so that you can log in here and get your saved searches and things like that from your SPIN account. But we're not going to go into that too much today. We're also going to kind of take a quick look here, these widgets that come up when you first log in. This is where everyone is going to do their financial conflict of interest disclosure. And if you get into your interest disclosure and you say, oh, I have a relationship, but I can't find the entity, that's what this one is for. So there's a new vetting process for requesting an entity to be used in your disclosure. And you only need to click this button if you need a new entity. So try not to click it out of curiosity. There's some cleanup involved every time someone clicks this button out of curiosity. But anyway, this is where you're going to be doing your interest disclosure. You can also kind of shuffle your widgets around on this screen by going to portal configurations. So there's some other widgets that you can use here. So for example, if I wanted to see the system messages, which is actually one that's going to be turned on for everybody here. I think it's in prod turned on already. It's not turned on in test. I'm just going to click use. And then I can use these little right and left columns to move things around. So let's say I want to see system messages at the top. Then I can just say save. And now I can see the system messages and I can see my other widgets are still there. So these two are required. You can't remove them. Anything else that you add, you can typically remove. And you can reorganize the screen so that the things that matter to you most are at the top and the things that matter to you less are at the bottom. So since you only do your disclosure once a year, it might fall to the bottom and that's okay. So that's kind of a quick orientation to the portal screen. And what are we here to do today? Well, we're here to create a proposal. So I'm going to start by clicking on the proposals tab over here on the left, or the proposals menu. And then you'll see I have some options here, and one of them is create new proposal. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. That's going to bring up our create new proposal screen. One of the things you'll notice that InfoEd just loves to do is it loves to stack windows on windows. And so almost everything ends up in its own little window here. So that is, you'll get used to it. Unfortunately, it's not ideal, but it does save some time later on when we're doing some other things. So I clicked create new and I got my create new screen here. So I'm just going to kind of go through these real quick. These are the fields that you need to complete in order to just start a new record in InfoEd. So number one is the PI name, and by default, the person who clicked create new is put in here in the PI. So if you are an administrator or someone else who's not the PI, you can change this name here at this point if you want to. You can also change it later, but you can change it here initially. Today, we are going to be creating a new proposal, but you also have the opportunity to copy from an existing proposal if this is going to be something similar to a previous proposal that you've done and you want to bring over some of that information that has the ability to use your previous proposal as a template for your new proposal. Today, again, we're going to do a new proposal, but we have some options down here if this is going to be a continuation or maybe a resubmission because the first submission didn't go through or didn't was reviewed and decided not to be funded. You can revise them and do a new one here. So I'm going to leave that as new. And then we get down here to the funding opportunities. So InfoEd has the ability and will have the ability to download funding opportunities from grants.gov and also from SPIN. So this is a great benefit, I think, actually. So you can search through grants.gov opportunities, and when you find the program that you want to apply to, you will use this grants.gov to search, and then it will bring the schema down. So the schema is all of the forms that are needed and all of the requirements that it has, so that all of that stuff is brought into your proposal record for you. You don't have to go hunting for which forms do I need and which ones do I need to fill out. They'll all be in that schema for you. So that's one thing. Also, again, you can search from SPIN to get those opportunities. But today we're actually just going to set up a proposal manually. So the example that I'm going to use today is a nonprofit called the Russell Sage Foundation. So I just started typing Sage. You don't have to start with the first word, or you could just pick, start typing, and it will, in fact, start limiting the list of sponsors down to based on what you've typed. So I could have started with foundation, and I would have gotten a lot more, obviously. So if I start with Sage, I get just these three. So I'm going to go ahead and select Russell Sage Foundation. I do have to click it from the list. I can't just type it. So I do have to select it from the list. And then now that I've got that, now I'm going to go down to my next field, which is the project title. So I'm just going to put in example for 2023 for now. You obviously you want a real proposal title in there, something that you can identify this from multiple other records, but this is not your last opportunity to change it. So if you wanted to just put something in to get started, you absolutely can. It can be edited later. Then my next set of fields here is the start and the end date for this project. So I'm going to go ahead. You can use the calendar to select the dates. So I could say this is going to start in January of 2024. And then it's going to end. I don't have to do the whole calendar thing. I could just type in, it's going to end on 12/31/2026. And that is going to give me actually 3 years. So when I tabbed off of that, or if I click off of that, then it actually calculates the number of project periods for me. If that's not an appropriate number, you can change the number of project periods that it has. But that by default, it just figures out how many years there are and puts that in as the project periods. So that's all I need to create a brand new proposal. This will create a record in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and click create. And it takes a second. And if this was coming from a grants.gov opportunity, it would be downloading the schema right now and figuring out which forms I need and putting them all on a page that looks a lot like this. So when it finishes creating it, you're dumped onto a page called Setup Questions. And there's nothing else in this menu just yet. First, you have to get through the setup questions. So it brought in my sponsor from the create screen, and it defaulted a couple of questions for me. So these questions right here are dependent upon the sponsor that you choose and that sponsor's schema. So what you see here is a very short list. Some of the lists of questions on setup questions for different sponsors are going to be significantly longer and have a lot more involved. But these right here are what we currently have set up for just a nonprofit foundation in our test system. So we have these defaulted. So if this was wrong, if this was an unsolicited application, I could change it. But because this is most often the way these should be answered, we leave the defaults on there for you guys to make it more convenient. In this case, I'll say there is a deadline for the submission. And I happen to know that Russell Sage actually has their own electronic portal. So we're not going to be able to use system to submit this, but we do know that you have to have an account in their portal in order to submit. So I'm going to go ahead and just choose electronic portal. I'm going to say the deadline, you can use again the calendar control, or you can type this. I'm going to say the deadline is actually just before Thanksgiving. And I can put a deadline time in. So that just happened to be something I typed in. That's a browser function. If you've already typed in a field, it'll remind you what you typed last time. And I can pick a time zone. So I'll just say it's Eastern Standard Time. So that's the deadline information. Then there's also some general proposal properties. In this case, I'm not using human subjects or lab animals. There's not going to be multiple investigators, and it's not going to be a training grant. So it's really easy to answer no to all of those. And then finally, it asked me some budget information. So what we're choosing here is which rate from the rate agreement should this be. So for example, this demo PI lives in a department on main campus, and this research is going to be done on main campus. So I'm going to go ahead and click main campus organized research. And it's, again, by default selected on campus for me because that's typically how we answer, but I could change it to off campus if I needed to. So that is my setup questions. And when I'm done with answering all my setup questions, I click save and continue. And then when I get to this page, this is when we get the rest of our screens or our tabs, they call them. Sometimes they call them tabs, sometimes they call them screens. I try and call them screens because that makes sense for everybody. And where you land is what we're calling our intake/endorsement form. So as Cece mentioned, we are attempting to consolidate and simplify and do everything we can to turn multiple forms into one form or into one process. And so this is the replacement for the intake form and the RSP 100. So there are some questions that are going to look familiar from the intake form and some that are going to look familiar from the RSP 100. We actually would like you to fill out, if you're a researcher, we would like you to fill out these first two sections right away, because what this does is it helps the grants coordinators determine what resources are going to be needed moving this proposal forward. So you'll notice there's instructions up here that tell you basically fill those out first, please, like answer our questions about resource engagement, answer our questions about research attributes. That will help your grants coordinator. And then come back when you're done with your budget and personnel and finish out with the shared credit section and the FNA distribution section. So I'm not going to answer all these questions just now because it does take a little bit of time. And of course, we are trying to get through a lot of content. So if it turns out that I can't answer them later, I will. But for the time being, I'm just going to pretend like I answered the resource engagement and the research attributes questions. Also, notice this is where I can change the title. So if I had previously just put in a TBD for the title or some sort of, just a couple of keywords, I can fix the actual title at this point here. All right, so I think I have gotten through the setup questions, the intake endorsement form. Okay, so I am going to pause for just a second here. This is maybe inadvisable, but I'll wait and see. Are there any questions so far? Okay, because I hate having to stack them all up, but for the time being, I will just keep moving then. This is good. All right, so after our intake endorsement form, then we have our budget. So this is the piece that is going to be the biggest learning curve, I think, for everyone, because it looks a lot different than our current Excel spreadsheet. It's not the same thing. It's the same idea. This is where you're going to put all the budgetary requests that are going in, but it is not doesn't work the same way. It's obviously doesn't look the same way or anything. So this is what we've been calling the budget tool, and it is an InfoEd development. We didn't have anything to do with this, so there are limitations what we can do with it. But you can see here that when I opened it up, it opened in its own separate window again. So I now have three stacked on top of each other: my portal view, my proposal view, and then my budget tool. So just keep that in mind. If you get a little bit lost or if you accidentally click over here, you might have to be like, oh yeah, I know it's in here somewhere. I got to find it. There it is. Okay. So nothing goes away. It just ends up being stacked. So it might hide itself on you if you're not careful. So you'll notice my budget that I created, went back on the create screen, had 3 periods. So it gives me automatically, there's my 3 periods. It split them out year by year. And by default, it put me as the PI in the personnel section here. So it did do a little bit of upfront work for me. So the first thing I'm going to do for myself is just say, oh, hey, I'm a PI. I've got some effort that I want to put in on this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the detail button right here next to the PI. And this is going to say, because this PI is a 12-month appointment, I can say how many person months out of that 12 month am I going to devote to this. So maybe I'm going to be putting like 10% effort. So I'll put 1.2 person months on this. So there's my salary, my base salary. It does actually include inflation at this point at 2% per year. That can be changed as well, but for the time being, 2% per year, and there's the base salary, and then there's my calendar, my effort. And when I put 1.2 in for the first year, it said, oh, you probably expect to use 1.2 for the second year and the third year. And if that needs to change, it can change. So I can put I'm not using the whole time. There we go. I can put 1 month on for year 2 and year 3 if I expect to be working less on it in the subsequent years. So there's effort. There's also a tab for cost share. We're not going to dig into cost share today because that is kind of a lengthy topic. But this is where you would say, the sponsor's picking up this much, the UT is picking up this other amount. Like I said, we're not going to go into that real strongly today, but I do want to point out that every line item is cost share. The other has the ability to be cost shared. The other thing I want to point out too is that when you put effort in here, it is committed effort. meaning it could be mandatory, required by the sponsor, that we have some sort of cost share. Therefore, we're going to put that in as mandatory cost share or whatever. Or it could be voluntary. It could be you're going to put that in as voluntary, but this is any effort that is committed to this grant. Okay, so that's it for demo PI. I'm going to put in this much effort, and I'm just going to hit save. And when I hit save, I could just save and close, but when I hit save, it shows me exactly how much my salary is going to be, what the fringe benefits are, and gives me a total. So I could have just hit save and close, but I hit save just so you could see that. And then when I hit save and close, it brings it over here into the main budget page. So
Jamie, I'm going to interrupt. I'm going to break my
Yes.
own rule. Is there a way for the person who's working on the record, who's a support staff, like the folks in our audience today, to be able to see on the screen what the appointment months are? Like, is it obvious if a PI is 12-month, 9-month, or something else?
Yes. Why don't I go into adding a new person and then we'll see that. So yes, I will show you that in a second. So I'm going to add another person to this project. I'm going to add someone named Joe Co-Investigator. That's a very convenient name for us. So I'm just going to start typing co in, and then it's going to, as you saw, it kind of filters down as more letters are typed. So I'm going to select Joe Co-Investigator. And then I get to select, is he key or non-key? So this is a distinction that's most important in NIH-like proposals, because they have a whole key personnel form or senior/key personnel form that this fills in. This matters for that. For our purposes today, it doesn't matter a whole heck of a lot. But I'm going to go ahead and say this person is also key. And then I get to give them a role. And so I'm going to say they're a co-investigator. And so once I have just made those designations, I click Add Person. And I get a little budget detail line that looks, for Joe, that looks a lot like the same one I got, except Joe has academic and summer here. So a 12-month person is going to have calendar available. A 9-month person is going to have academic and summer available. The other place you can see that is by going to appointments. And so when you flip over to the appointments tab, you can see what the base salary is, what the appointment start and end dates are, and whether it's an academic and 9-month appointment or whether it's a 12-month appointment. So all this information is coming out of Banner. It is not advisable for you to change it, but it is that is the information that is coming out of Banner. So for Joe, I'm going to say he's going to give me 1 person month in the summertime. And so again, I can save and then see what that translates to in terms of salary and fringe benefits. And then I can cost share some of Joe if I need to. I can also write a little blurb about the justification for Joe if I need to. But all this information is just about my co-investigator, and his name happens to be Joe. So I'm going to go ahead and click save there. And so now I can see I have 2 personnel, 2 personnel on my project, and what those are going to cost. Also, there's the F&A here, and we'll get to that in a second, but it does calculate the F&A for that person. Because I said this was main campus research, and because it starts next year, I think it's at like 51.5, maybe 52 at that point, but we'll see this in a second. So there's personnel. The other thing that let me make sure here. Oh, if you start typing a name and you cannot find the person, that is because not everyone has a profile in InfoEd. We didn't add every single university employee and every single student because we want to keep this to the list of people that actually need to be in here to keep our list pretty clean. And so if you need to, if you try and find someone, you can't find them, and you need to request a profile for someone, you can send that email to infoed@utoledo.edu. Give us a first and last name. If you happen to have it, a rocket number or a UTAD or both would be super helpful. And maybe an indication of what department or world they live in. That would also be very helpful to help us get that profile in place for them as fast as we possibly can for you. And then we will send an email back and let you know that we've created the profile and you can use them in your budget at that point. So we have brought in a large portion of people already, people who are on proposals and protocols as of this moment in our old system, and even some significantly further back than that. But of course, we have a whole new crop of people coming in because it's the beginning of the semester. So we might have people that don't have profiles yet. So please be patient with us, but send us an email and we will get that done as soon as possible. All right, so that's my personnel spiel, but also on this page, we have our non-personnel. So in this case, I was gonna pretend that this proposal was just about surveying some people. So maybe I had a public data set that I was gonna use, and I was also going to enlist the services of a survey company. So basically, in that case, I was going to go to the non-personnel area, and to begin with, we're gonna start a budget category. So we're going to select a budget category. So these budget categories, they came from mostly from the NIH side of the house as well, because a lot of this is kind of catered to the NIH world. But we have our ability to manipulate these a little bit. And one of the things we did here was we said, oh, okay, we want to change this name to Purchased Services and Consultants. So in my imagined proposal here, I need to use some outside purchase services to get my data set and also to do my survey. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And when I do that, then I get this list of object codes. So InfoEd calls them object codes, Banner calls them account codes, but basically what they are is, you might be familiar with them if you do any work in Concur. This is basically categorizing how you're going to spend that money. So in my case here, I'm just going to call this outside purchased services, which will be for my data set and my survey services. And then I'm going to click add item. So I click add item, and again, I can see I get all 3 years here. If I say I'm going to spend $11,000, oops, not $11, but $11,000. In year 1, I can also see that I'm going to spend that in year 2 and year 3. Maybe it's going to cost me a little less in year 2, and maybe it's going to cost me the same in year 3. Or I could have said, oh, maybe it's going to cost me a little bit more. So I could add inflation here. I could change these based on a percent or just based on a number. And again, you can see there's a justification tab for you to be able to, it reminds you to save your changes, right? So yeah, so there's my my numbers. Again, you can go to the justification tab and write out a little justification for yourself. There is obviously another tab in the main record for putting in the actual budget justification document, but these could be just simple notes to yourself. Also, there's the area where you can do cost share, which again, we're not going to get into today. But so there's my total for my non-personnel items. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close. And so there I am, 11,000 in the first year and 6 in year 2 and year 3 for a total of $23,000. And then so down here, you can kind of see this is just a summary of everything, what by period and by total sponsor cost and what's F&A, what F&A is going to come in for those years. So one of the things I wanted to point out before we go too much further is that, like, at this point, I'm going to say my project is done. Like, this is as much of my budget as I'm going to put in. But there are a couple things that I need to do because, and the first thing is Russell Sage doesn't actually allow F&A. So one of the things I need to do now is change this to 0 F&A. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to the F&A tab and say, okay, my target scheme was organized research on main campus. So that gives me a prevailing rate. It gives me a 52.5% F&A. But unfortunately, since this organization doesn't allow it, I'm going to go ahead and change this to 0% indirects. And when I do that, it changes this to 0 fixed by sponsor. And when I hit apply here, it's going to take all those nice F&A costs and just do away with them. So because the sponsor doesn't allow us to charge indirects. So you saw there were numbers here and now there are not numbers there. And you'll also see that now I have a drift figure. So this is how much we're basically giving up because Russell Sage doesn't allow for indirects. So this is all the F&A that we lost on the salaries as well as the outside purchase services. So there's a little red flag here that just basically says, look, you've changed the F&A, and so you're not getting what you would normally or have expected to get based on your target scheme, based on your target type of research, type of rate agreement. Sorry about your luck in this case, I guess, right? So that's one of the things I wanted to point out. The other one is if there was cost sharing, there is a cost sharing breakdown screen. Again, cost sharing is input by line item, but it is summarized over here on this screen. We're not going to go very deeply into that. And we're going to go to the justifications here because this is where you would upload your normal budget justification document. So if you have a nice written out explanation of everything, a lot of sponsors ask you to do it in a certain format. This would be where you would write that document and upload it instead of just making little notes across each line item about what the justification was. So that's as far as I want to go into the budget today, because again, we're going to run out of time if I don't keep moving here. So again, this is just an overview, kind of a survey level of all the things that are in InfoEd, and that's our budget tool. So again, against my better judgment, I'm going to pause for a second and see, are there any survey level questions, overview type questions that I can answer right now? Okay. All right, excellent. So I am going to use the done button here. So I want to point out a couple of things. Number one, there's always a save button up here. And number two, there's always a done button up here. And the done in this particular case, because it's on the budget tool, isn't as important. But InfoEd, because it's so collaborative and because multiple people could be working on the record at once, it's really important to use this done button. Because when you open a record for editing, it means that you are that you are the one using it and making changes, and no one else is allowed to make changes to it. Everyone can open it for viewing, but if you have it locked, you have it locked. So actually I lied. I'm not going to hit the done button yet. I'm going to go back to budget for a second. But so the done button is really important though. So please do use the done button instead of just using the little X over here. So at this point, I'm actually going to say that my budget is complete. I've added everything. I've changed the F&A rate to meet what the sponsor requires. I'm not going to have any cost share on this. And so this is going to be my budget. So when I'm done with that, I'm going to hit this complete budget button. So when I hit that complete budget button, now I can hit the done button. Now it moved it, by the way, it completed the budget and it moved it into view mode. So right now, again, I could go to all these screens, but I wouldn't be able to change anything anymore. If I did realize I made a mistake, I can always uncomplete the budget and then fix it and then recomplete it. But for the time being, I'm just going to hit the done button. And then when you notice when I did that, I get a little check mark next to the budget. So I completed it, and now I know visually from the proposal side of things that it is done. The other thing that it did on my intake and endorsement form is it filled in the budget information down here in this little budget summary. So you can see what just basic information about that budget. So again, I'm going to skip past anything else on this screen. I'm going to go to personnel. And on the personnel screen, you can see that I have my 2 people that I put in on my budget. Now, it's possible you could have additional people that you need to add here, but if you've put them in on the budget, they're going to be here already. And in this particular example, I don't need to add anybody else. It's the same rules as we added from the budget. So decide if they're key or non-key, or if they're one of these other categories. We will have descriptions for what all of these mean and why you might choose them in our instruction manual. I'm not going to go into that today. But again, you could search using just a few letters of the last name or a few letters of the first name, and then select their role. So it's all kind of the same: key or non-key, name, role, and then you can add them in here. It also brought in the effort from the budget. So you can see 1 person month and then a calendar. Apparently it was like an average. Yeah, it's an average of my 1.2 and then my 2 years at 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and click the complete here. And that's going to put a nice little checkbox right next to personnel as well. So at this point, this is when I would go in and complete my intake and endorsement form. So in addition to those demographics and resource engagement and research attributes questions, we also have the place for shared credit and FNA distribution. So let me check my little list here. Oh, I missed a couple things on the personnel page. Apologies. Let me go back. Okay, so one of the things you might notice on here is that you can upload your bio sketch for this particular situation. With Russell Sage, I don't actually have to have a bio sketch to upload here, but if this was a system to system, they do require bio sketches for at least the PI and sometimes all the key personnel. The other thing that you'll notice here is that there's a little column for your conflict of interest. So what this is actually telling you is that Demo PI actually has EFI disclosed on their disclosure. So this is a helpful tool for the PI to know, oh, the people on here have completed their disclosure. So that means like this is an up-to-date disclosure, but they had something on their disclosure. They said they had some sort of financial interest. If I added a person that didn't have their disclosure complete yet, it would be a red question mark. And that would indicate to the PI that they had not yet done their disclosure or it was expired. And in either of those situations, it could be beneficial to the PI to reach out to those people and have them do their disclosure in InfoEd as soon as possible, because that is one of the things that would hold up if you got an award. Chasing down disclosures is one of the things that takes the time in between award and spending. So it's one of those things that you might want to get a little bit ahead of. And if you can see immediately when you add a person to a proposal that they are missing their disclosure or delinquent on their disclosure, then it's possible to start getting ahead of that.
And just to throw
ahead.
one little detail out there, because I think this is important to plant the seed early. With the new vetting process for COI entities, that takes a little bit of time. So as opposed to the old system where a PI or a COI could go in and put their own entity in and complete their disclosure, now if their entity is not in the system, they have to first go and request the entity, wait for it to go through the process, then go back and finish their disclosure once that entity is approved and added. So I just say that now to plant the seed that folks are going to need a little bit of lead time that they may not be used to from how we have done it in the past.
Excellent point, Stacy. Thank you very much. Okay, so now after pointing out those little attributes of COI and where you would upload a bio sketch or a CV, now I'm going to go back to the intake endorsement form. So fix the title, right? If we need to fix the title, we already answered our resource engagement and research attributes questions. And now we're going to see our personnel list has our 2 people in it, and our budget summary was filled in from before. So we have 2 things yet to fill in. Number 1 is shared credit. So we have our little rules for shared credit here, and shared credit and FNA distribution used to be effectively the same thing, and they're no longer the same thing. This has actually happened a while back, but it's finally very clear here that shared credit and FNA distribution are not the same thing. So in this particular case, I have 2 people in my proposal. I'm going to go ahead and add a line for shared credit. And I'm going to say, I'm going to give 100. I'm going to give 90% shared credit to the PI. And I'm going to give 10% shared credit to Joe co-investigator. So this is the same rules. I just start typing and then I select when it comes up and 10. So these 2 things should add up to 100%. And again, this is just shared credit. So we do use this in reports, but it doesn't determine FNA distribution. FNA distribution is going to be down here. So we do have some newer rules about FNA distribution. Because we're going to be able to use this system to drive some functionality in Banner, we had to limit the combinations of FNA that we could have, where before it was a free-for-all, it is now going to be a very structured and limited list. So you can see you can have up to 4 departments that get FNA on any given proposal. And then in these drop-down boxes here, you can see we have different percentages. So, for example, both of my people on this one are in 1 department. So I'm just going to go ahead and start typing. They're both in something called Test MC department. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Test MC department. And then I'm just going to give that department 100%. But if I was splitting if I was sharing F&A across multiple departments, I would select all my departments in descending order of F&A distribution. And then any combination you can make out of these four that add up to 100% is a legitimate combination. But there are some combinations you can't make. You'll notice that I don't have like an 85% in the first one. So I can't do 85 and 15, but I could do 80-20, or I could do 90-10, or I can do 80 and 10 and 10, or I can do 80-10, 5 and 5. So there's enough combinations here, we believe, to cover most scenarios. So again, if you can make it add up to 100, it's a legitimate combination, and you can distribute the F&A in that manner. So I'm going to take another little pause here and see if anybody has any additional questions about shared credit and F&A distribution and this intake/endorsement form.
If there's 3 people, can they split it evenly?
Yes, Rick, if there are 3 separate departments, they can in fact split it evenly. So we have accommodated an even split. So that would be 34, 33, 33. So there's 33 and there's 33. This is pretty small on the screen. I apologize for that. I wasn't paying much attention. So yes, 3, an even split across 3, an even split across 4. All of that is feasible, but not every combination is possible.
Can you do a Control Plus? There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe?
Yep, I can. Yeah, I did. I don't know if it helped all that much, but there you go. So it's a little bit bigger. Okay. All right. So I'm not actually going to complete this intake form because obviously I have to have answered all these questions in order for it to be complete. So for today, I'm just going to leave this incomplete, but I am going to move us on to attachments and routing. So attachments and routing is where you would add any other application files or forms that are necessary for this particular proposal. So in my case, Russell Sage has some rules about what documents you have to include, and that's on their website. It's not anywhere here. So because this was not a system to system submission, so I don't have any of those schemas that I was talking about. I just have to know, I have to read the opportunity and be able to be responsive to that. And I can add those additional supporting documents or application forms or anything here when I do this. The other thing that I do on this page is I'm going to submit this to route. So when we were talking about automatic routing, that means that based on the people on my proposal and the chairs and deans that are associated to those departments, this is actually going to figure out who has to sign this proposal, who has to endorse the proposal. We used to call it endorsing, right? This all used to happen on the RSP 100 form. And so this is the replacement for what you might call the sneaker net, where we ran around with a piece of paper or possibly passed around a scanned document that was scanned multiple times and signed and scanned again. This is going to be the replacement for that process. So I'm going to go ahead and say there's only one route you can choose here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit submit on this. And what it's going to do is the first thing it's going to do is bring up our certification statement. So the certification statement is the same statement that's been on our RSP 100 form forever. And it just says, I promise I'm going to behave. And I've read all these policies and I understand what they mean. And I acknowledge the articles of the bargaining agreement, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to go ahead and click accept here. If I click decline, this goes nowhere. So I have to accept the certification statement because I am the PI. So I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. And when I do that, it is going to show me who else is going to have to sign this thing. So it's spinning in the little corner here. This is why I like Chrome, because it does tell me that it's thinking while it's thinking about things. And right now it's going through and saying, what are all the departments and who are all the heads of those departments that need to sign on this proposal? And what it's done here is it's basically going to show you what that path of that proposal looks like in the endorsement process. So the first thing that's going to happen here is the PI is going to get a receipt, a submission receipt. So they're going to, the first thing is the PI gets an email that says, thanks for submitting this to Route. And then the next thing is it's going to go to the grants coordinator. So in this case, I happen to be the grants coordinator. And that is going to go through them for an endorsement readiness check to make sure that the budget is complete and has all of the appropriate pieces and the personnel are listed and everything is good so that it can be endorsed. So that's the next step. If it gets past the endorsement readiness check, then the PI gets a little notification of that, and then it goes to the investigators. So in this case, we only had the one extra investigator. That's Mr. Joe, co-investigator. And so it's going to go to him next, and he's going to get an email that says, hey, you've been listed on this thing. It's time for you to endorse it. And he gets a very similar certification statement that demo PI did. And he also has to attest to that certification and then move it along. And then when he's done and says, yes, I accept, then it goes on. The demo PI gets another notification that says, hey, all your key personnel have signed off. Next, it's going to go to your chairs and deans. And so our next step is our chair and dean. And of course, they belong to the test department. So they're handily named MC Test Chair and MC Test Dean. Both of these folks here are obviously fake accounts, but they get notified at the same time. So if there were multiple departments, if I had multiple people, investigators from different departments, all of those would be calculated and put here, and everyone would get notified at exactly the same time. So it's no longer a serial process, it is a parallel process. So if I had two departments, I could have both chairs signing at the same time, and it doesn't have to wait for one to go to the other. It's not a chain of events now, it's a rainbow. Everybody gets it at the same time. So you can work on amongst yourselves in the chair and dean world who has to sign first. And maybe if I'm waiting for somebody, that's fine. You can wait. You don't have to sign it right away. But it does mean that everybody gets the notification at the same time. So once all the deans and chairs have signed off, then again, the demo PI gets another little notification that says your leadership has finished signing. And our last step is the post-endorsement review by the grants coordinator again. So they get to look at if there were any suggested changes, or I would approve this if and only if we make these tweaks. Then the grants coordinator gets to make a decision about whether that needs to go back through route, if there's enough time, what kind of changes are necessary. Are they okay to just proceed forward and make the changes? That is going to be a grants coordinator responsibility to decide, does it need to go all the way back through endorsement again? Does it have time to do that? And also, or is it simple enough that we can just make the changes and move on? And when they have to make that decision, then we're going to notify the PI that the route is complete, and it's going to be put in a status that says it's post-endorsement and final development. So at that point, if you hadn't finished, for example, the science, or there were more additional forms, like, for example, when it's a grants.gov, there might be additional 424 forms to fill out or anything like that. Those could be completed at that time. They don't have to be complete prior to endorsement. They can be completed post-endorsement. So I'm not actually going to hit the submit button here. Having gone through all of this, I'm hoping that's sufficient. But when you do hit the submit button, you get that same list down here. It shows up in this kind of white space that's underneath the form list or the document list. And that will tell you like whose hands is it in? Has there been any comments? It tells you when people made their decisions and what decisions they made. So you get to see kind of a running list here of how far this has gotten and whose hands is it in. And if it's been in somebody's hands for a while and you maybe need to go poke that person or figure out if they're in town or anything like that, this is going to be your route tracking area right here. So it is nearly 4 o'clock. That is the end of my spiel for right now. There are steps obviously that come after this, but this is our overview up to the endorsement process of like how you're going to fill in your proposal. So I'm going to take a pause here again and ask, are there any questions that we want to go over right at this moment?
We do have about 30 minutes left scheduled, and the last few slides I want to share with you will only take a few minutes each. So If you have specific questions, please let's hear them and we will address them as best we can.
All right. Well, that's good. That or I spoke way too fast and left everyone in the dust. That is one of my besetting sins, is talking fast when I feel like there's a lot to talk about. So
I see there's
okay.
typing going on. Here we go. Is there
Okay.
going to be any faculty training on InfoEd? Asks Jane.
That is a great segue into the last part of my PowerPoint.
Let's do that.
All right, let's do it. I'll pull up the slides again. Unfortunately,
Yep.
Teams resets my slides to slide 1, so I'll have to scroll through to get where I need to be, but it won't take long. So, in answer to the question about faculty training, this is what we currently have on the schedule. Another webinar just like this will take place on Thursday in the morning on Teams, and we will go over the same overview information and address the same kinds of details and answer questions and so on Thursday. We also currently have an in-person training with a focus on NSF submissions. That'll be later in the fall, in November. There's a little bit of discussion on exactly what room that's going to take place in, so keep checking our site for more details on that. And we are always talking about what trainings are needed and when we're going to put those on the calendar. So right now we are working on developing some budget-specific trainings, as well as some workshop opportunities. So the budget specific would be like advanced InfoEd as opposed to today, which was InfoEd 101. And then our workshop opportunities would be bring your proposal to the lab we're hosting in, and let's work on it together with you and see how far we can get you in the process in a workshop setting. So those are in development, and we will update our resources page once we have dates and times and things like that. Also, in terms of resources, please check out our InfoEd FAQ page. I've started calling it the InfoEd at UToledo page so that people know what that page is about. The link to it is in the chat. That has recordings from past trainings. Today's recording will go there once it's ready. We have some help guide documentation posted there, PDFs that folks can open or download for their reference at their convenience. And we also have some typically asked questions, including when are we going to have trainings? What about this? What about that? And what is the rollout timeline? Because we are staggering the implementation of InfoEd based on sponsor type and proposal type. So that is on our webpage as well. And at any point, if anyone has questions, concerns, suggestions, or things that just don't seem intuitive to you and you want to know if we can do anything to make it a little better, please reach out to us at infoed@utoledo.edu. We will try to be as responsive as we can to that email box. It is monitored by all of us. So feel free to let us know the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we want to improve our training and we want to make this process as easy for you as we can. Other than that, if there are additional questions at this point, or if anybody has something that occurred to them in the last couple of minutes, we've still got time. We'll stick around. Go ahead, Rick.
Stop recording right now.
Yep, we'll stop recording. So if you've got something that you want to